Hello everyone, and welcome to this session on protecting staff on casualised contracts. This webinar is being broadcast live and will be recorded and available for viewing after the event. This webinar is part of our series of webinars that we've been producing under our Fund the Future campaign, and it's very nice to see you all here. Well, when I say see, obviously I can't see you, but I'm assuming you're all out there, so it's lovely to have you. Thank you very much. We've got a number of speakers today, so bear with us. There will be lots of change, but we thought it was really important to hear from a variety of different people and different voices from across all our sectors. I'm Jane Thompson. I work for UCU in the Bargaining and Negotiations Unit, and I'm also the lead officer for casualisation at the UCU. And I'm joined in my chairing responsibilities by Christina Payne, who's the Vice Chair of the Anti-Casualisation Committee and also works at London Met, and Christina will be talking to us later, and by Vicky Blake, our UCU President, is also helping me out here today. We'll also be joined by Rebecca Spencer and Seamus, who are our sign language interpreters, so welcome to them. So without further ado, I will kick off. That's the introduction done. And I'll pass over to Christina and Vicky to just give us a brief outline of some of the things that UCU's been doing to support our members on casualised contracts, both before and during the crisis we're currently in. Thank you, Christina and Vicky.
Okay, so, hi, I'm Christina Payne. Just welcome everybody. And I'd just like to say, firstly, that everyone here who stands up for casualised workers and is joining in our fight to secure the casualised are very brave to fight against insecure slave labour, basically what it is. I think that basically the corona situation has highlighted obviously many flaws in the university system of employment, which we all know, and it's shown up many fault lines in university employment practices. And in this respect, it's also challenged, I think, UCU to have to respond in perhaps in a very quick way, actually, to a very big crisis, which is that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of casualised staff across the country are losing their jobs as we speak. And we need to continue to doing that. This has involved quite a lot of work from NEC reps and the ACC in coordination with UCU, and also their coordination with the various kinds of campaigns that have sprung up across the country from different universities and different kinds of crisis situations. And we've coordinated with them, and we've brought their ideas into the structures of UCU, and we have put motions to NEC and HEC, and we've called for a number of quite radical options. And we're now seeing those come to fruition in the stuff that UCU is doing. So the Fund the Future campaign and 10 steps that were introduced on Monday, all of these includes a lot of those things that we were calling for in the meetings that have run up to this period. And the organising of these webinars is part of that. So it's great to have you all here. I think one thing that I would say is that one major job that we have is to not only secure the casualised in this situation, but also to get permanent staff to start working together much more, I think. So to get permanent staff on board with casualisation even more than we have done. And I think this also necessitates that the UCU, us actually, have a more agile way of responding to this kind of crisis we're in now, because we really do need to save the jobs of people who are leaving jobs at the moment. So it's going to be great to hear from all these different people from across the country on the different campaigns. And I look forward to hearing from you. And I'll pass on to Vicky now.
Thanks, Christina, and thanks very much, Jane, for introducing us. So I was on a casualised contract for a long time, and I'm lucky enough not to be now. And I think the thing about that experience is it never leaves you, and the horror of, being potentially back on a casualised contract never leaves you. And the situation that we're in now, and people keep using the word unprecedented, but it really is serving to highlight just how bad and how exploited the situation has been across further and higher education, so across all of post-16 education, for members who are on contracts that aren't permanent. So they might be insecure in different ways, anything ranging from 0 hours to agency work to fixed term contracts. And UCU, driven by member-led campaigns, has done a lot of work on anti-casualisation over the years, but this has really thrown into sharp relief just how vital it is that we make fighting for secure work and fighting for those who are most vulnerably employed at the centre of everything that we are doing in this fight, because it has been probably thousands, if not tens of thousands of staff who are seeing job losses in the form of non-renewal of contracts or non-provision of hours they might normally have expected, hitting them first. And that's been really, you know, a theme right from the outset. As soon as the shockwaves of this virus started to hit, this has been where the impact has been felt, often by workers who have been doing extra unpaid work to be able to help their students cope. So the themes from today will be summarising at the end as well, but I hope that everybody who's involved in watching this seminar or who's watching it back later on can take a look at the 10 points in the pledge that UCU released yesterday for how everybody can do something to support members on casualised contracts. I think we have to remember that as a union, we are the union, we, the members, make this union. And there are certain things that we can ask for the structures of that union to do, but it will be meaningless if every member of this union doesn't take forward all those initiatives. So we need everyone to be part of this campaign, right from the grassroots up. We have seen UCU put out an awful lot of advice and a lot of work into lobbying around the situation that's there for staff who are being hit hardest at the moment by the situation. We've seen a lot of lobbying, for example, on extensions to fixed-term contracts, extensions from funding bodies for research contracts. We've seen UCU also lobbying for clarity from the government around the furlough scheme, which, as it turns out, universities could have been making much more use of than they did. So again, it highlights the way that casualised staff are treated by their institutions, so by colleges, by prisons, by community education providers, and by universities, and the kind of second-class status that they've often afforded casualised workers. Because actually being able to furlough staff would have been a very simple thing to do straight away to put lots of people's minds at rest. We achieved clarity for that as a union, and still we didn't see lots of employers take that up. And I think we'll be hearing some more soon from Sheffield, who did actually do some work around this. A lot of advice has gone out around the furlough scheme for different categories of staff. A lot of support has been there for branches in terms of local campaigns, in terms of how to get UK-wide and kind of devolved nation attention on those. There's always more we can do, but that more that we can do relies on there being a lot of communication happening between branches, like across the UK, and between branches and the UK level of the union. So we're hoping this webinar will be a big part of making that conversation bigger, making that conversation wider, helping us to determine what more support branches might need, what more support grassroots activists might need, and how we can listen to what's happening on the ground and help that to shape the campaign. And what we're doing is very much part of that Fund the Future campaign, but we have to make sure that it's constantly listening to members, and that's how we drive things forward. So we've seen lots of stuff coming out in the press, particularly recently. There's been a bit of attention in, for example, the Financial Times, which is turning out to be a slightly more progressive publication than many of us might have thought at one point in time. It's done quite a lot of coverage of the issues around casualisation. We've also seen stuff in the Times Higher and other news publications. If you share the video that UCU produced and you share the pledge and you help keep the attention and the focus on this issue, we will get more media coverage, we will get more embarrassment towards employers for how they are behaving in this crisis, and we will help to intensify the pressure on them to act properly. So although everybody may feel, oh, I'm just one person, the whole point of being in this union is that we all do something, we all stick together, and we all make a great big noise together. So that's me, and Jane will introduce the next speaker, and we'll come back at the end. Thanks.
Thank you, Vicky, and huge apologies to Rebecca, our interpreter, who somehow got kicked off the screen, and mostly to any members who are using our interpreting service. Apologies for anything you missed. And the recorded version will have captions, but huge apologies for that. As I said, what we want to do is welcome speakers from across our different sectors who are looking at different aspects of campaigning. We thought it was important that we spoke to someone from a post-92 higher education institution. There are particular issues around post-92 institutions. often multi-campus, often less organised, often less big than some of our bigger higher education universities. And so we're delighted to have Kyron here with us from University of the Arts London, just to talk to us about organising in a post-92 environment and some of the issues that's thrown up, and how people who are also in that same environment can use Kyron's old experiences at UAL to help their own campaigns. So over to you, Kyron. Thank you.
Thanks. I hope everyone can hear me. Yeah. Yes. I'm a lecturer an hourly paid lecturer at University of the Arts London. I'm also secretary of the coordinating committee. I'm also on the board of governors. And one of the main ways in which I think organisation can happen at branch level is through the mobilising of hourly paid lecturers as reps, because the more you have visible, I mean, the more visibility you have of hourly paid staff throughout the union structure, the more likely you are to catch those informal networks that people build up between themselves. Often hourly paid lecturers don't even realise they can be in the union, and that's been a passage we've been through for about. Well, I've been in this position for 11 years. It's been a passage that we've been through for the last 5 years. And a big change in our experience at UAL was the Four Fights campaign. So I'm going to talk partly about how we mobilised to get over the threshold as one of the few post-92s who did that in the second round of ballots. We are University of the Arts London is post-92, that's to say it came about through the conglomeration of 6 different art colleges, each spread out all across London. So we're a multi-campus site, which meant organising was always a problem. At one point, I was the only rep for Camberwell, Chelsea and Wimbledon colleges, which anyone who has a kind of glancing knowledge of London will realise that's 4 campuses that actually takes an hour at least to get from one to the other, and doing them all 3 in the same day is quite difficult. It also means you don't have any sense of what life is like on the ground in those colleges, so that those kind of informal networks are very important. And my position as being an hourly paid rep means I'm copied into information that then tends to get sent to, say, 70 or more others. I then have a small network of people I can contact to find out whether they're in the union or not. And that's one of the first ways of kind of bringing people in. That's kind of 101 level. What we've achieved in that time, which has been the focus of most of our organising, is a security of employment agreement, which I've sent a link to, which was a significant kind of win for us in 2016. I'm happy to share that with anyone who wants to write or find more information about it, but that is actually much better than anything that was offered during the UCIA negotiations, because it does actually recognise that staff who've been here for working at the university for 4 years have permanent status, and that word permanent is often thrown up in discussions of casualisation. People often say they want to achieve permanent status. The thing that's different about a post-92 and art and design one is that we don't have the same graduate teaching systems. We don't have the same process of people doing research, moving on to their PhD, teaching while they're on a PhD, and then progressing supposedly up to a faculty post. We have 2,500 associate lecturers and hourly paid workers at hourly paid lecturers at UAL, which also makes mobilising very difficult. But the very fact that we're so reliant that so much of the teaching happens through casualised staff means that actually the university was able to could be brought to the table to negotiate a security of employment agreement, which is, the basis also of fighting cuts, because it does mean that the agreement gives those who are on permanent contract, that's to say on renewed casualised contracts, that's to say they're on fixed term contracts of a year that is up for renewal, but but their hours get changed, not the actual contract. So they have the right to 100% of the hours they had the year before, which means that they also can be included in section 188, which means that any sudden sweeping redundancies which are happening across the art and design, across the sector, have to go through formal consultation. I'm realising I'm getting into quite a lot of detail on this now, but actually that throwing up the section 188, using the fixed time workers, using the regulations to say that this is actually less favourable treatment, so using the 2000 and the 2004 regulations, sorry, my brain is fried when I'm trying to think of the dates, have been ways in which we've pushed back, because at the moment, especially in this unprecedented, this pandemic situation, it's been almost impossible to get any proper regular discussions with management. You find things are happening in what they call a crisis regime, which means that they simply circumvent the usual kind of panels. You don't have the same opportunities to find out what's happening, and also to sit down and discuss, actually negotiate. They're not even really negotiating. They're inviting comment rather than actually realizing that certain things have to be consulted, and that negotiation means you reach an agreement, and if it's not agreed, then you enter a potential dispute. All those things have been kind of pushed off the table once we've moved into the crisis situation. So from the 4 fights, I say that we organised through, actually that was a key moment, because we took it on as a kind of military campaign. We went through sheets and sheets of work, of ticking off, didn't let go until we'd got a tick against someone's name, knowing, having confirmation from them that they had actually voted, and not minding if they got sick of phone calls, of emails, of text. We use the UCU text service that we send text to everyone, and that actually, what we led on in that was the fact that casualisation was brought into the pay campaign for the first time ever, and that also linked to, we don't have a gender equality problem per se at UAL, but we have a race equality pay problem. The extent of which they won't divulge at the moment, but that all is due to change. And that, moving that as the central argument in the campaign was key for us. It brought in new reps who have now, and other people who saw activity on the picket line, who've now decided to become reps. So we now have a growing kind of equality rep sector. We now have an increasing number of hourly paid reps who are able to, you see, getting remission for full-time staff is difficult, but saying to hourly paid workers that you can be paid for your union work actually is an incentive, and be paid for your training. That's, again, how I kind of fell into the role. And it means that, for example, in organising people who teach on short courses, which is one of the most precarious of our employees, they're not even employed by the university, they're employed by a separate wholly owned subsidiary, profit-making subsidiary. They have absolutely no rights. They weren't furloughed. They've been told that their courses are not running, and they are facing the loss of £5,000-10,000 with no notice at all. What we've done there is organise a collective grievance, because they haven't even got a recognition agreement. We've gone to ACAS, and we're still working through that at the moment. But we're able to do that through using the resources of new reps who have the time. We've seen it as a problem for years, but we didn't actually have the capacity to reach out to all those people who have the time to go through email lists, to go through charts of courses and find the names of people, to do that, as I said, that kind of military campaign, and building allegiances. So now we've the crisis has meant that we can have Zoom meetings, we can incorporate people who could never be found on the same site. That geographical problem I spoke about of trying to get people from the East End and the West End and the South and North of London has been surmounted in some ways by having regular Zoom slots. And we're also, that moment in the 4 fights where we were able to still actually physically meet meant that we established all sorts of allegiances with other art and design colleges where people know each other because they've all worked in the same field, mostly in the same galleries and same sort of precarious employment in London, but haven't actually had to meet as lecturers before. We established connections there, and we're able to keep having Zoom meetings, and that has also been part of the kind of, we're able to teach each other what we know and to support each other when we can. And that's basically, that's it for now.
Thank you, Karen. That's really, really helpful. And I think it gives us lots of ideas for people to think about when they work in the same sort of environment as you do at UAL. We have put the link to the document you sent through to us onto the chat, so it's there. Yeah. Apologies we couldn't get up on the screen in time. Okay, thank you very much, Karen. We're now going to speak to us 2 representatives from Sheffield University branch, Stefan Blaney and Edda is also here. So they've been running a campaign since the crisis. Well, they've been running campaigns for a very long time, but they've been running a very high-profile campaign since the crisis started. And what we wanted them to do is to come and particularly talk to us about how they've managed to build solidarity action between staff whose jobs aren't at risk and those who are at risk. So, I mean, in shorthand, between permanent staff and those on casualised contracts. And we've got a lot to learn, I think, from the Sheffield campaign in that regard. So welcome, Edda and Stefan, and away you go.
Hi, thanks, Jane, and thanks for having us. So I'm Stefan Blaney. I am Anti-Casualisation Officer at University of Sheffield, UCU. First of all, I'm going to speak quickly about what we have been able to achieve at Sheffield so far in response to the crisis, and about our sort of anti-cas organising strategy as a branch. And then I'm going to hand over to Edda, and she's going to talk in a bit more detail about the toolkit that we've published for campaigning on casualisation, and the ways, as Jane says, that we've been trying to build up that solidarity between precarious members, permanent staff, and also students. So in our response to the crisis over the last few months, there's sort of three main groups of staff within the anti-cas remit. So hourly paid casual workers, graduate teaching assistants, which at Sheffield are on a GTA contract rather than a casual agreement, and then staff on fixed term contracts. So Vicky brought up the furlough scheme in her introduction, and a big win for us early on was making sure that hourly paid workers would be eligible for furlough so that their jobs and their income would be protected. So for hourly paid staff who couldn't work from home, the university agreed that they could be furloughed, and also really significantly that they would top up their wages to 100% of what they would have expected. And as Vicky says, it's a real shame that other employers didn't follow this lead. But yeah, hopefully that work was useful for the people in other branches as well, fighting on that issue. So for graduate teaching assistants, GTAs, this is postgraduates who teach alongside their studies. We were also initially able to protect a lot of people's income for the remainder of the last teaching year, so the 2019-20 teaching year. So GTA work, a lot of it could take place remotely, but we got agreement that where this couldn't happen, people would be able to claim pay for teaching that had already been scheduled. We got funded extension for final year PhD students on university scholarships, as well as no cost extensions for self-funded PGRs and no further fees for self-funded PGRs in their final year. We got the removal of a clause in GTA contracts that prevented people from working for the university while taking a leave of absence from their research. And the university have also set up a hardship fund for PGRs affected by COVID. So that's been a sort of, well, a quite limited lifeline, but a lifeline for some of those GTAs who've lost teaching income. So these are some sort of good short-term results for the last teaching year, but it's been a lot more difficult as we approach the new teaching year. We're seeing departments announcing big cuts to GTA budgets, increasing numbers of departments saying they won't be hiring or re-engaging GTAs for the new year. And obviously we know this isn't just the case at Sheffield. This is a lot of higher education institutions around the country making similar announcements. And really that sort of pattern is a similar story with fixed term contract staff. So at the start of the crisis, we pushed the university to take a proactive approach, asking departments to see whether contracts could be extended or made open-ended. And early on, we had a lot of success. So between March and June, of about 300 contracts that were due to end, only about 70 weren't able to be extended. And that was, a lot of them were sort of secondments or parental leave. But these were mostly research contracts. And then over June and July, we've seen large numbers of teaching contracts coming to an end. And it's been a much harder fight to get a good deal for these members. Yeah, so a lot of teaching staff aren't going to be rehired, aren't going to be re-engaged, same with GTAs. So what have we been doing to fight this? How are we building this campaign to protect these workers? So we're lucky at Sheffield that we've got a big committee, and we've been able to set up a small sort of task group, which has been directing our anti-casualisation work, including me and Edda. But we think it's really important, as Kyron says, that these campaigns make use of those informal networks and build from the ground up, and that they're led by the concerns of casualised staff themselves. So from early on, we've been holding open meetings as well as extraordinary general meetings, specifically for casualised staff, for fixed-term contract staff, for postgraduates, and trying to engage people who might not be in the union as well, might not know they can be in the union, as Kyron said. And these open meetings are a really good way of gaining information about what's happening in different departments, finding out what members want from us, and also what they can contribute. So we've had a lot of really important work done in the last week by sort of ordinary members, non-committee members who've committed time and effort to campaigning on job losses. We've also surveyed members online. So we did a survey for people who've been, for GTAs and fixed-term contract staff who've been affected by the crisis. And this provided a lot of really powerful personal testimony. So some of you might have seen our social media campaign with the hashtag precarity stories, which is, really building awareness of how these cuts impact people's lives. A couple of the pre-submitted questions for the webinar asked what we can do to increase the visibility of UCU on the ground. And that's maybe particularly hard when working remotely in some ways. But I think these kinds of sort of targeted interventions, specifically, aiming to engage staff whose jobs are at risk and which are focused as much as on listening to members as they are on telling them what we're doing, are a really good way of doing this. And also, as Christina says, engaging as many permanent staff as possible. So we've been encouraging our reps to hold meetings in their department to find out what's going on and see what can be done there. So that's what we've been doing at our end on anti-casualisation and how we've been trying to build the campaign. I'm going to hand over to Eda now, I think, to talk about what we've been trying to do to build that beyond staff directly affected. So, as Jane mentioned, to build up that solidarity between precarious staff and permanent staff. So I'll hand over to Eda. Thanks for having us.
Hiya, I'm Eda and I'm one of the Vice Presidents for Sheffield branch. So Stefan sort of summarised our overall strategy and some of our wins. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the campaign toolkit that we launched and focus specifically on solidarity action, and then to end with our sort of next big fight. So taking all the information from our targeted EGMs and our departmental meetings, we developed a campaign toolkit which we shared with all our members and more broadly. And sort of generally we asked people to quantify the cuts in their departments, how many modules are affected, that kind of thing, and use that in our negotiations with HR. But specifically in terms of solidarity action, inspired by the Corona Contract Group, we developed a permanent pledge for us at Sheffield locally for permanent staff to sign a pledge of support and solidarity to casualised members. We also asked permanent members as well as non-permanent members to keep spamming senior management. So we wrote up some email templates for things that could be sent. We also suggested templates for email signatures and have these email signatures identify some of the issues that people are facing. We also asked both permanent members and non-permanent members to use the university's own internal communications channel. So there's this email address that you can write about stories that are happening at Sheffield that can then be publicised by the university. And we've been asking people to spam that with their own testimony as casualised staff, but also asking permanent staff to spam that as well. And that's led to quite a lot of departmental reps organising departmental meetings where groups of permanent staff have written to senior management saying, we're really disappointed that these cuts are happening. And with a focus there on highlighting that the cuts to casualised staff does have an impact on permanent staff and vice versa, particularly in terms of workload. So that was sort of a run through of our sort of campaign toolkit, and I think that's going to be shared in the chat box here. We also spent a lot of time focusing on how we can build solidarity with students. So in the campaign toolkit, there's a template email for fixed term contract teaching staff and graduate teaching assistants to send to their students and ask their students to write to their heads of department and to senior management expressing their disappointment and anger about these cuts. So we sort of did that and had that sort of letter writing campaign. But we also supported groups of students to develop their sort of own campaigns. So we met with friendly student societies, gave them tips on how to build an effective campaign and how to advocate as students for their learning and teaching conditions and protect the jobs of GTAs and fixed term contract teaching staff. We also met regularly with the SU and are looking to develop more of a campaign in collaboration with the SU sabbatical officers. So that's kind of an overview of the sort of solidarity actions we've been taking. Our next sort of action is focused on cuts to graduate teaching assistants. At the moment, this isn't university-wide, but is faculty by faculty and department by department. And I think what's interesting here is that about 2 years ago at Sheffield, we negotiated for the creation of a graduate teaching contract, which moved us off casual worker agreements and onto 0-hour contracts. So, you know, a success in terms of being recognised as employees and not workers, but still in 0 hours. But the significance of this is that us being recognised as employees now means that we're entitled to redundancy pay. So one of the major arguments that we're working on in our negotiations with management is making that argument of, well, actually, a lot of your GTAs need to be paid redundancy pay and actually should be included in the sort of formal processes of S188. And that's kind of the argument that we're making at sort of negotiation level. And yeah, that's pretty much it, I guess, as a summary from what's happening at Sheffield. Thanks.
Thank you very much to both Stefan and Eda. Loads of inspirational stuff happening at Sheffield. Do follow them on Twitter and the various other platforms if you can. And if anyone's read the 10 steps, you'll see that we've taken quite a lot of inspiration from the Sheffield campaign. So thank you both very much for sharing that. The next speaker we've got is Elaine White, who works at Bradford College, but is also the chair of our anti-casualisation committee. So welcome, Elaine. And Elaine's branch ran a very successful campaign 2 years ago now, Elaine?
Yeah.
I think? Year and a half, something like that. Casualisation are again in the midst of a campaign. And we really wanted to hear the voice from someone working in FE and what the issues that face our members in FE. So I'll hand over to you, Elaine.
Thank you, Jane. So I work at Bradford College and I teach ESOL. So this is English for speakers of other languages. This is in adult community education, and in my college we teach teenagers as well. And in this particular area of teaching, casualisation is very widespread. FE colleges are undervalued and underpaid, and hourly paid staff in those colleges are even more so. But last year, UCU won a massive victory. Despite the college being cash-strapped and indebted college under a Tory government, under austerity programmes, and facing endless redundancies and lecturers having no pay rises for 10 years, last year we finally won a deal for the use of hourly paid contracts. We won no one should be hourly paid for more than 2 years, and we won fractionalisation as well. So if you're on an hourly paid contract, therefore, and you were teaching so many hours, then you got moved onto the average hours that you're teaching. So on a 0.2 or well, hopefully not a 0.2, but on a 0.5 or a 0.6 or 0.7. Hopefully most people got onto a full-time contract, but not everybody, and I'll come to that later. But what we won was massive. It made a big difference to people in my department, and I think we won better contracts for about 100 people overall. We still have a subsidiary company, and that's being closed, and I still have my very beady eye on those people, and I'm hoping to try and make sure that those people are not forgotten. But my message to people here, who I think a lot of university people are listening, is that if an indebted Bradford College can do this, rich universities have no excuse not to treat their staff so badly. How did we do this? Well, we won the victory off the back of the 2018 UCU FE Fights Back campaign. So this was a campaign of rolling strike action. Bradford College was one of the first colleges in 2018, in the autumn of 2018, to get over the line. So there were about six branches at that point. We won. We got over the 50% threshold, and we took strike action. And over that year, there was a rolling. We took strike action in the autumn, then again in January, and then again there was some more in March. By March, we'd taken 7 days of strike action, but we had no pay. In May last year, we had 131 FTE job redundancies announced. And our branch had to make a decision whether just to fight over the redundancies or continue over pay. We voted to fight for both pay and against the redundancies, because on the basis that pay is about funding and pay is about securing all jobs. The college came back to us and offered us instead of pay, because they have no money, they said, well, we'll give you 5 days holiday. Anybody who's an hourly paid contract knows holiday is worse than useless. So we, and that was our moment. That was the moment for hourly paid staff, because we'd been on the picket lines with everybody else. And I was there to make sure that hourly paid staff were not forgotten. The anti-casualisation campaign had been bubbling along for years and years and years. Vicky knows this. She's worked with me for many years over that, and the Anti-Casualisation Committee as a whole were working with me on this for years and years and years. And that was the moment to take, because it can be very disheartening. It can feel like you are fighting and nothing changes. You never win anything. But sometimes it's about picking your moment, and that was our moment. And we took it from the back burner to being hourly paid staff had been on strike along with all the other staff, and therefore we needed improvements too. And as part of that, we got the 5 days holiday, and we won a massive victory for hourly paid staff. What we've won, though, has been fractionalisation. And I think that this is something that, one of our older campaigners, Leslie Kane, quite often talks about as being casualisation as being like a hydra. And you get many, many forms of it. And UCU, we have been fighting for fractionalisation, we've been fighting for fractionalisation, but I am a bit afraid that that is not enough, because currently Bradford College, we are now fighting redundancies. Some of those redundancies are clear-cut, their jobs have gone, and some people are having their fractions cut massively. So people who have had full-time jobs or 0.8 or something are now being offered 0.4s. And I see this as a sort of another form of keeping staff worried, keeping staff in their place. And so we know that, next year they will come back and they will have another go at more people's contracts. So, we had a massive victory, and I think it needs to be celebrated, but never be complacent. We can never rest on our laurels. And I would really, really urge people. I have a petition to save the jobs that are currently at risk. So I'm sending that round to people who can see it, and I would really urge you to sign that petition. Education is important. It needs funding, and we mustn't let anybody tell us otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine, and thanks for that inspiring talk about what you managed to achieve in really difficult circumstances at Bradford, given the financial situation and everything else that was going on. Hopefully it will give other people inspiration. But I think one of the things you said is that casualisation and all these attacks, you never win once and then stop and everything's fine. It doesn't work like that. And I think every activist knows, you win something, sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So we have to keep up the fight. The next person we've asked to come and address you is Anthea Hanlon, who is part of Liverpool University branch, UCU. And one of the things we wanted to talk to that branch about was the work that they've done in making political connections in the community. and how that's helped their campaign. So we thought that was an important part to a campaign, and something that we know that Liverpool's been very active and has done very well. So over to you, Anthony.
Hi, thanks, Jane. So yeah, I'm Anthony O'Hanlon, branch president at Liverpool University. I just want to talk about, as Jane said, the support we've had from local politicians and the work that's been done. I think to begin with, we have to be honest and say that we're in a very fortunate position in Liverpool where workers' rights and trade unions aren't an inconvenience to a number of the local politicians that we have, and there's a genuine support for trade unionism within the city, which obviously helps us to build that relationship. And we have, since 2018, really, Dan Carden was very supportive. He's the MP for Liverpool Walton. So during the 2018 action, he was very supportive, publicising a lot of the dispute and putting pressure on senior management within our university. And then since 2019, we now have an influx of 4 local MPs who are all very supportive. So we've got Dan Carden, we have Kim Johnson, who is the MP for Liverpool Riverside now, who the university is in her constituency. We have Paula Barker, Liverpool Wavertree, and Ian Byrne from West Derby, and all 4 have done a lot of work in kind of raising, the issues that we're facing at Liverpool, particularly the expiration of over 600 fixed-term contracts between May and July, and we're still waiting on our final figure for the August expiration. So I think a lot of the work that we've done, really, we're in a fortunate position, as I say, that they are receptive to what is going on, and they support the labour movement. So we're in obviously a different position to some areas. We've always kind of, work that is done within UCU. A lot of our members are very active in other movements too, which always helps. So a lot of our members, if you go to any kind of campaign in Liverpool, you're never more than 3 foot away from a Liverpool UCU member, probably at anything regarding social justice. If you're at a Black Lives Matter demo, a climate demo, any picket line across the city, you'll always have that. So we're able to build those relationships with those MPs through that also. What we've done, though, is kind of lay out to them the situation at Liverpool very effectively, and I think as a branch, we took a deliberate step early on to go on the front foot around the financial impact within the university and to publicise that rather than wait for their inevitable claims. So we shifted the narrative to an extent by arguing that there's a financial alternative, to begin to argue to open up the books, to begin to argue the impact on the local economy, as the Fund the Future campaign is talking about, and very importantly, and our local MPs were very receptive to that too. They don't want to see redundancies with their constituents and the knock-on impact of that too. So I think if you've got sympathetic MPs, it's always useful to begin that conversation, and even necessarily, MPs who don't see themselves as natural allies with trade unions, they certainly don't want mass unemployment within their constituency. So it is still a conversation to be had from any party, really. But what we try to begin to work on is that we have a vice-chancellor and a senior leadership team, and I'm sure every institution is similar, where your leadership likes to see themselves as local dignitaries and likes to see themselves as very important within the kind of the civic society within the area. So they want to maintain that relationship with MPs and want to try and justify kind of what is being implemented by the university. So we're able to gain some information that we might not have been in other ways, in terms of some contradictory advice on finances or some contradictory positions on student recruitment, which we'd heard originally. So cultivating that relationship, we began to set up meetings with not just the MPs, but also the other local branches within the city. So all the HE branches came together and began to organise around the threats that we face and how we can respond, and the work we'd like to see our local representatives take forward within that. And a number of meetings came on the back of that, and various action particularly around our campaign, which is probably being harder hit than the other institutions within Liverpool. So as a result of our kind of relationships that we've built, we've had Kim Johnson has been in local media constantly criticising the university's approach, and this predated the kind of campaign around the 1-to-6 ratio, but also when right after the strike, a lot of institutions, obviously with the goodwill that had been carried out by staff, saw strike deductions staggered or paused indefinitely. I saw a comment on social media, I forget who it was from, about the level of work that has to be done for one vaguely decent human thing done at Liverpool. And this was another instance where we had to lobby all four representatives to kind of put pressure on the university, and that public damage and that reputational damage, which probably impacts them more than a lot of things in certain scenarios, and makes them scale back from some of the aggressive kind of steps they implement. So Kim Johnson was in local media, was very kind of critical on social media also, as were the other MPs, which helped kind of build that relationship more and again, kind of put pressure on the employer. And then since COVID and the threats to jobs, we've had a number of kind of, you might have seen our Defend All Jobs campaign. I think I've been on leave, but somebody from our branch is speaking on social media about it. A number of MPs involved in that in terms of promoting the video that we put out, selfies in solidarity with our Defend All Jobs hashtag, and Ian Byrnes also and a number of others have put out our clear demands around the implementation of a 1-to-6 pay ratio at the university, and ends in gross pay inequality. I think that they've all been very kind of helpful within that, and they've put forward our aims, not just UCU's but Unite in Unison and all campus unions together. They've done a lot of work on that, so that's really kind of publicised it a bit more. We've had Paula Barker at a debate on a finance debate in Parliament, ask questions specifically around higher education and around kind of the threats to jobs within the city. People often forget that our employers are likely to be the largest or one of the largest employers in the area that you're in. So, that, as we've said, the economic impact is massive, and that kind of pressure in that respect, I think much more needs to be done, and maybe something that branches need to do with local politicians is explain sometimes just how big higher education is within your city or within your constituency in terms of not only jobs but the knock-on economic impact, and also begin to hit on the employment practices actually at these universities, because a lot of kind of the things we see, and we know because we're the activists who deal with it day to day, but our employer is as abhorrent as Mike Ashley or Amazon. They employ exactly the same practices, but because of the nature of education and the civic good that universities play, it's overlooked, and so our leaders can be invited onto kind of boards around Liverpool, or local authority kind of commissions on education, or within city region kind of advisory roles and these kind of positions. And there are plenty of other people who can do that. A VC is seen as the name, and we need to push much more with local politicians and with representatives that these employers are as abhorrent as any, and legitimising their employment practices won't be tolerated. And we've begun to kind of get that buy-in within Liverpool. We have a lot more work to do at local government and the Metro Mayor level, but we have 4 allies who are clearly more aligned with workers than they are an exploitative marketised model. And I think, as I say, not everyone will have that, but everyone will have an MP who doesn't want redundancies. Everyone will have an MP that doesn't want an outbreak of a deadly disease in their constituency because of an aggressive move to online teaching. So there are kind of relationships that can be developed in that way, and anyone who has an MP who's sympathetic to workers' rights, make that effort to not just sign a petition, but meet with them and meet with whoever's in the area and meet and discuss how they can take your campaign forward. But also, it's not transactional how we support elsewhere also, and put in, emphasize the work that your members do in other organisations, anti-austerity movements, kind of, racial justice movements, any social justice movements that you have members prominently campaigning, and remind them of that too, and that UCU is an active union, and I think a lot of them are aware of that, and that's why you get that relationship. So it's about building it really. I think, as I say, that they're the key things to talk about. It depends on where you are, obviously, and it depends on the situation, but there are basics that can be done by everybody. And our branch is always happy to kind of discuss the meetings we've had if anybody wants to contact us afterwards in terms of questions you might have around how an MP might be able to get more financial information or more information around the threats to jobs, then, you know, after this, we'd be happy to field any of those questions or take on any kind of, you know, offline conversations around all of that more than happily. I'm conscious of the time. I think I have just eaten up my time, haven't I? So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Anthony. And I've got to say, every one of our speakers has been spot on time. So thank you all for being on time. Absolutely fascinating what you're doing at Liverpool and what you've been doing, and your connections with your local politicians. If people have looked at the Fund the People campaign, we're on live, Amy. Then you'll see that one of the things we have been asking people to do is to contact their local MP. The details are there. And another thing that we've managed to set up is actually you can go into your postcode and find out how many people are likely to work in tertiary education in your MP's area, in your ward, and the impact, so that when you write into your MPs, you can actually, and as a branch, you can go to those MPs and say, look at the impact of this, look at the impact on jobs, how many students it affects, how many knock-on jobs this is going to affect if we allow this to happen. So thank you to Liverpool for that, and for sharing that experience, and it can be done. And I've even known Tory MPs respond quite positively to these sorts of campaigns, so don't give up. The next speaker we've asked to come along is Amy Lee, who's one of the founders of the Corona Contract campaign, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. Have been very instrumental, very quick in getting some campaign ideas off the ground and getting people to fight against the targeting of casualised staff in terms of all the cuts and the threats to universities and colleges. So welcome, Amy, and we'd love to hear about your campaign. The floor is yours.
Hi, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good, because I can't hear anyone else for some reason, but it's good. All right, I'm just gonna keep my remarks as short as I can, but I'll try to get through a lot. I am an organizer with Corona Contract, which is a national campaign to protect casualized workers. A lot of our organizers, including myself, are on casualized contracts, and a number of us have lost work or are facing lost work or hours. In June, I was granted a last-minute contract extension, like in the few days before my contract ran out. So I want to speak to the kind of panic that this causes. While we're doing urgent work for universities, we're also facing things like immediately not being able to pay rent, having to move across the country or the world, potentially deportation-like scenarios for people on visas tied to their employment, having to consider leaving the profession, and also the betrayal that you're a source of income for the university as a member of staff or as a researcher, and you're presented to students in order to get their tuition money as a member of staff like any other, and you're simultaneously being exploited in this particular way. This is happening because our contracts are grotesquely inadequate. Even worse, at the RCA, for example, they're not even on what we would call contracts, they're on terms of engagement. And layoffs are not happening because cutting our jobs and hours will save our employers loads of money. For example, at SOAS, the salary costs of 20 members of the executive board add up to 1.9 million, and that amounts to more than all of their 282 fractional staff combined, who are paid collectively 1.7 million. So we're being cut because we are vulnerable, because we have fewer rights. And it's not a coincidence that if you look at our faces, we're disproportionately Black, people of color, and female. So what we've done as a grassroots national campaign, and I think this shows an opportunity for UCU nationally to kick into gear. Despite what we are facing, I really believe that we can win if we are sufficiently clear about the brutal realities of this situation and see this as an opportunity to start building a new kind of labor movement, recognizing that while some workers are vulnerable, we are all vulnerable, and we need to act as widely and collectively as we possibly can for secure working conditions for everyone at universities and colleges. So I want to put forward as much optimism and determination as possible about campaigning on the national scale. This can be the start of a massive shift in our consciousness of how to wield power as workers, which again, despite the way that they treat us, our labor is incredibly valuable. It makes an incredible amount of money. We have a lot of power and we outnumber them. And, casualized workers are an increasing majority in the sector. Okay, so there's a lot of us. If not in the union, in the sector, casualized workers make up the majority of workers at education institutions. So we started our petition in March, demanding a 2-year extension to all precarious contracts. We did this because we anticipated that a hiring freeze would be introduced, and we did not want to wait for that hiring freeze to be confirmed. We wanted to anticipate it. Our strategy, as much as possible, has been to try to anticipate action by the employers and inoculate against it. So we wrote a model branch motion demanding extensions to contract, and branches were able to use this motion as a starting point to call meetings and pass that motion and start organizing ahead of time to oppose cuts to casualized staff. In May, we came together with workers from the IWGB to support ongoing direct action at Goldsmiths, at the RCA, and I believe there was a partial marking boycott at Sheffield as well. So using those tactics, including marking boycotts in defense of precarious staff, and there's been some success with the Goldsmiths campaign. In June, we organized a permanent staff solidarity pledge, which people have spoken about earlier. And we've held a training on how to implement that pledge, which you can find on our website. And I think we'll put it up on our website if it's not there already. And we're hoping to take part in more trainings going forward and fight back trainings. And I think Christina will talk about some of the HEC motions that we've put through, calling for a national campaign to defend jobs, which is why we're here, today, and some of those things. We've also spoken out very much to defend the Four Fights dispute and keeping the dispute open, recommending that members reject the UCIA offer. You can find our reasoning at greater length in a few articles we ran on the New Socialist magazine. And a lot of our actions so far have been motivated, again, by trying to inoculate workers against attacks from management, trying to put forward what we think are realistic worst-case scenarios, and trying to prepare in advance and take action, be on the front foot, as people have said before. I think we even didn't go far enough in realizing how quickly some of this would escalate. In our editorial in New Socialist, we raised the issue of compulsory redundancies, and then I heard about these being put on the table potentially the very next day. So we're seeing worse and worse attacks and threats of compulsory redundancies to staff, permanent staff as well. We're also seeing workers being asked to work for free, such as in Leicester, where studentships for BAME students were advertised, including a significant teaching element. So we really need to oppose this free labor in the ways in which it is a slow attack on our terms and conditions, right? We're hired on certain contracts, then we're let go, and then we're taken back on with inferior terms and conditions. So I really think it's important. But I think this can only happen with support and solidarity across the board. A large group of poorly paid staff could, for example, collectively decline to take up exploitative contracts, but they would need to have a solidarity fund in place and other kinds of support, grassroots support for those kinds of actions. So what do we need going forward? What are our priorities? I think Kieran already spoke to this really. A grassroots campaign, you need to call people, text them, video call them, contact them, have discussions, start scraping email lists, getting contacts, building your networks on WhatsApp, Facebook, sending out alerts to people, and building the infrastructure of a democratic grassroots action committee on a local basis. Getting people into your unions who aren't already in the union. One way we found that's very helpful is to start putting forward open letters or petitions so you can get people's names, in your departments who might not be in the union, who might care about these issues. And if your local branch isn't doing anything, you can pitch it as well and say, look, can you believe that people are supposed to be negotiating our rights and we're not there? We've got to join the union and fight back. Okay. So even if things look grim, that's a really good selling point to get people into the union to take over, in a democratic fashion and kind of get things moving on the anti-casualization front. So, branches should have dedicated officers to work on casualization issues, and that's part of the model local rules. And if they don't, that should be the case, and you should demand that somebody take up that post and get national union to help you if that's needed. We need a lot of regional level anti-casualization people too, and we're calling for that as well. We also really need to be talking to members of other unions. So Unite, Unison, the GMB, and the IWGB, and any other subcontracted workers. But I don't mean just talking to reps. I mean talking to members of these other unions, getting grassroots groups together and starting to have discussions so that we can have input into collective action when the time comes to take it, which again is already on the table for many institutions holding votes of no confidence and potentially heading into local disputes right now. So we as Corona Contract have been pushing really hard to start brainstorming now in terms of collective creative actions that we can take. And we know some people aren't feeling heard by UCU, so it's crucial to get this right and bring as many people in as possible ahead of any further industrial action so we can democratically input into strike strategy and other strategies if we're going to win. So thank you so much for having me on. And you can follow us at Corona Contract. And I'll just get off now. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks so much for that. And I think it's really important to hear what some of our colleagues who are also, active in grassroots movements are doing. And sometimes there are things that people in grassroots doing have the agility and the ability to do stuff that other people don't, branches don't, because of the makeup of the branch or for all sorts of other reasons. So, it's great that we can work with those groups, and we did a session with Pandemic PGRs last week as well, another grassroots group with an overlapping interest with UCU, and we're very happy to work with all those campaigns. We're going to move now into a session looking at some of the pre-submitted questions and any questions that have come up during the course of the speaks, which Vicky's going to coordinate. So we will try and cover those questions that have come up that people have submitted if we haven't already done that. And we'll have a chat about that. If there are other questions, burning desire to ask, then you can put it in the comments. I can't promise we'll get to them, but we will do our best. And I know that some of the questions have been being asked along the way. But again, if there are other questions that come up and we don't get around to answering them, we will try and do that after the event. So over to you, Vicky.
Thanks very much, Jane. So I have a very short time in which to try and get through quite a few questions. And as Jane has said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get through all of them, but I'm going to do my best. So some of the pre-submitted questions that we had come in were quite specific ones. So for example, we had one that came in asking where unit leaders or program directors who need to request additional delivery through casualized contracts are being asked to fill in authorization forms for associate lecturers to be re-engaged. It was noted, I'm not sure which branch this was at, it was noted that casual contracts were being used in a way to box tick the ratio of BAME staff employed by the uni rather than implementing that through fixed, through more secure posts. And that long-time casualized staff who were already in a precarious position through COVID-19 and from before COVID-19, who really ought to have had fractional posts, are being made vulnerable again with those new processes and agendas that were being brought into place in that institution. And it was also asking that if a higher ratio of BAME academics are employed on casualized contracts, surely this is another form of discrimination. And this is something that Amy picked up on just now in her contribution from the Corona Contract campaign. We know that BAME staff and also that women are more likely to be on casualized contracts. So cuts that target that group of staff will also therefore de facto have a disproportionate impact on BAME staff and on women, and actually also often on our disabled colleagues among us as well, who are often forced to work in those more casualized contracts. So we've been highlighting this as a union in our lobbying and campaigning and also in our press work. And what we really need branches to do, and this is about how we pull together in this campaign, is to ask for an equality impact assessment of any proposed cuts. So that would include, and we need to be really clear about this, the renewal or the non-renewal of fixed term contracts and where hours are being reduced from those on variable hour contracts. So I think that it's really important to remember that management will be saying, well, no, we're not talking about job cuts. We're just talking about non-renewal. That is the same thing. And we need to make sure that equality impact assessments are asked for in those circumstances as well. And another question that came in was about how can these equality impact assessments be used to fight casualized workers being disproportionately targeted. And it's absolutely imperative that we use those to demand that proposals are withdrawn. And we also use them to the max in terms of local publicity and the kind of shaming that will put the spotlight on those who, I think it was Ant said, our senior leaders, vice chancellors and so on, like to see themselves as part of the wider civic society. Well, universities and colleges are supposed to be part of, a civic society. They're supposed to have a civic mission. So are we going to just let it slide when plans are put in place that will disproportionately target casualised, BAME, disabled, and women members, or are we going to make a fuss about it? And I think the answer there is obvious. We make a big fuss about it and we put the pressure on them that way, because they will feel that pressure. And a lot of the public just don't know that this is the sort of situation that a lot of workers in post-16 education face. There's a question here from South Thames College saying that it seems from September, courses will only run subject to enrolment, but of course many hourly paid lecturers are very worried that they'll lose all their hours at short notice. So it's asking, what can UCU do to protect them? So what needs to be happening is asking right now what jobs are at risk and starting now a campaign to safeguard jobs. So where possible, getting in touch with those hourly paid members. And I think what's been spoken about by some of our contributors so far, holding meetings, holding open meetings where you invite people who are not members yet to come and find out what the union can do for them, to be part of that campaign for safeguarding jobs, but also to get that information. What have they been told? What sneaky messages have been coming out through the employer to people who aren't necessarily members? What is being leveraged against them? How are they being frightened? Get in touch with people, network with people, and then highlight those potential losses. Build that into your political and industrial campaigning. And it's very important to know that branches can absolutely contact regional and devolved national offices for support, as well as head office as well. Just whizzing through again, we've got lots more questions. There's one here about what legal obligations do universities as public sector organisations have to change their plans once equality impact assessments have revealed, as they have at the uni this person's writing to us from, I'm not sure which one it is, interlocking the adverse impacts on 4 protected groups by age, race, sex and socioeconomic status? So the answer to this is quite a long one. There's no kind of standalone legal obligations to change plans, but those institutions could well be failing in their public duties if they don't change their plans, and that's enforceable by the EHRC. So branches in their campaigning need to be making that point to employers as early as possible. If you can impress upon employers that this would be not only an embarrassing but an extremely damaging position to be in early, then you may be able to pressure them to change their plans earlier on. But with that underlying threat that you're going to be going public with this, and this ties to the previous point about making public the equality impact assessments and doing that political work, contacting not only your local MPs, but also your wider political activist community in your area, making the point that this is going to affect a whole community. And it's not just, that people who work in universities or in other institutions are in a bubble, that this is part of the broader economy, part of the broader society. So individual members can join forces with colleagues in the department or institution to write a letter that is collective, so it expresses concerns about the equality impact of cuts to precariously employed staff. The route that could go through might depend on what sort of institution it is, but for example, you might write to a department's Athena Swan rep, you might write to their equality and diversity lead, perhaps both would be a good idea, and make sure that the letters get copied to the UCU branch and get it on social media, get it out there. Because in terms of the Equality Act, the legal obligations, that's one thing. But actually the moral case in conjunction with those legal obligations is probably where we're going to have the most power. And it's having that, more than one prong to the attack is so important. In terms of socioeconomic status, that isn't specifically covered under the Equality Act, but you might have local policies in place that refer to it. Certainly the widening participation mission of a university and commitment to equality and diversity should include that kind of thing. And a university does not exactly look great if it is disproportionately targeting those who are from particular socioeconomic groups. It's the opposite of having a civic mission. So where students are also employees at risk, so for example, graduate teaching assistants or whatever they're called in your institution, cuts to teaching could directly impact on whether students can continue their studies, so within their postgrad studies. And so we also need to be asking for quality impact assessments on that, and very much building this in with the widening participation agenda. As a widening participation worker myself, I know that everything basically will come back to how diverse an institution is and how diverse a student body that institution can support. And if there is a problem with inequality in terms of staffing, there will be a problem in inequality with the students and how they are supported at the institution. Another question, is there a definition of casualisation broadly accepted by HE senior management in universities? And if so, what is that definition? And it goes on to ask, does that recognised definition include reducing staff hours via restructuring, and so on? Now, I have to say, from having been in negotiations with UCEA, no, and also there was a lot of disingenuity. I'm not sure if I've just made up a word, but they were very disingenuous about recognising what casualisation is. And we spent a significant amount of our time in negotiations educating the people on the other side of the table that casualisation is a spectrum of everything from 0 hours, hourly paid agency staff to fixed term contracts of all different kinds. So the straightforward answer is no, there is no one definition, but we use a definition at UCU, which is if your contract is not permanent and secure, then you are casualised. So in terms of the data collection in higher education, we've got some data that's covered by those on fixed term contracts, hourly paid and 0 hours contracts. And there's also this atypical category, which is supposed to cover people who are only working very occasionally for the employer. That it's kind of a bit wobbly, that definition, and we don't get an awful lot of reliable data out of institutions. And often when we've put in FOI requests, they are unable to identify, apparently, the people who work for them already, because they will tell us, for example, they have no 0 hours employees, and actually we know because we're talking to them through the branch. So there's a lot of work there to be done around the data, as well as on the pressure that needs to be put on management through that data. And if they can't find the data, then that is another support of pressure on them, because how disgraceful not to even be sure where they have people working for them. And it really shows how embedded casualisation is within the sector. I have not very much time left and a lot of questions to go through still, so I might try and bring some into the summary later on. But there's one here which talks about the UCU is well known by communities on campus, but people need to see UCU more on the ground rather than only when there's a strike. Asking what other things can be done to spread the message on a wider scale in a more positive light. I think a lot of the speakers so far have addressed this in different ways, actually, but what we really need to do is to highlight our work on fighting casualisation that dates back before this issue that we've got with this crisis around coronavirus, and how it connects to workload and equality. And we need to be better at publicising when we've got positive outcomes, both locally and across the UK. So this means working more closely, I think, with student unions as well, getting local newsletters out, localised posters that talk to the local community, perhaps looking at working with trades councils and the local TUC as well, and just getting that message out there more broadly. I'm going to try one more question before I move on, maybe two if I'm quick. What are we planning to do in the battle with universities to end the shameful 0 hours contracts? So the answer to this question has a long history. It's been going on for a long, long time. Much of the negative publicity that you will have seen in recent years is actually is a result of the work that UCU have done, particularly through the Anti-Casualisation Committee, along with the TUC. We've put a lot of pressure on the TUC as well to amplify this message, and working with other unions together against these kinds of contracts. So we have actually, as a union, successfully negotiated the conversion of hundreds of hourly paid and 0 hours contracts to fractional contracts, and pursued a lot of institutions to stop using 0 hours contracts. But we don't necessarily publicise that well enough. And also there are so many that may end up feeling a bit like a drop in the ocean, but it's an important drop, and it needs to lead to lots of ripples that will keep that campaign going. I think one of the important things here is not to lose hope, that actually we can do something, and we've shown as a union that we can do something. And a lot of what we're talking about here in building that broad base of campaigns and constant vigilance, what Elaine was talking about, you know, you get one win, you can't just go, well, brilliant, we fixed it now. It's about that constant pushing forwards and campaigning to make sure that whatever is thrown at us, because let's not forget, employers will always throw things at us, we are ready to respond. So we have decreased the amount of 0 hours contracts in the sector, not enough. It is still a massive disgrace. We're using the evidence against employers. As I said earlier, a lot of them don't even realise where they've got 0 hours contracts. And we would expect any branch where contracts on 0 hours are still being used to be pushing hard and negotiating to ban them. So, for example, through lodging a local anti-CAS claim. I have still got more questions to go, and I've come to the end of this slot, and we need to kind of move on to talking about how we use the Fund the Future campaign to support local campaigns. Jane and I are going to be talking about that, but I will try and work in some of the answers to the remaining questions to that. But if it's all right, Jane, I'm going to hand over to you because I've been talking solidly for 15 minutes. I need to take a breath, and I'll come back in if there's anything you want me to pick up on.
Okay, thank you, Vicky, and thank you for doing a good job on the questions and getting through lots of them. Yeah, we're just obviously, you know, the Fund the Future campaign is the sort of the mass campaign that we've launched to lobby the government for more money to fund tertiary education in the light of the COVID crisis, but on a jobs first basis. And we made very clear at the launch of that campaign that when we talk about jobs first, we are talking about all jobs. We aren't just talking about the jobs as so-called permanent staff. We are talking about every graduate teaching assistant who's being told there may not be any work for you next year. We're talking about every researcher whose fixed term contract is coming to an end. We're talking about every 0 hours member of staff who's being told we're not sure, probably no work next year. Every single one of those is a job that we need to fight for. And that's what we're trying to do with this campaign. So it's very much a jobs first campaign. The outward focus in terms of lobbying and stuff is to actually build that support for the campaigns locally. And there's lots and lots of information in the campaign on how branches can get that local campaign. And as Anthony said, make those local connections with your MPs. Tell them what the impact will be. Show up the disgraceful impact of what the universities and colleges are planning to do in terms of the equality impact, the impact on our BAME colleagues, the impact on women, the impact on our disabled colleagues. We need to bring that all out and absolutely shame them. They are quite sensitive to a lot of this stuff, so we need to keep going and doing that. And this week we launched something called our 10 Steps Pledge, which again, you know, we recognise the input that other grassroots campaigns and branch campaigns has had into that. We don't, you know, exist in isolation. We have used all that stuff that's been coming up from the grassroots to initiate that campaign and input from the anti-casualisation campaign. That basically sets out 10 steps that we are asking individual members of staff to take to support their colleagues who are at risk, who are on casualised contracts. Obviously, people on casualised contracts can do that all, but this is really about saying to the rest of our membership, you need to stand up for everyone. You need to stand up for all your colleagues on casualised contracts who are absolutely in the firing line at the moment. So there are 10 steps. We've launched a new video. We're asking people to share that. We've, you know, suggested an email tag. And as it goes on the 10 steps, they become more, you know, asking a little bit more of people. So we're asking them to get involved with writing to their MP. We're asking them to get involved with their branch. And again, we've had lots of ideas on how that can work today. So really that's what the Fund the Future. We've got, like I say, all these webinars happening as well, and they're all parts of the same jigsaw about how we campaign and we fight to protect jobs. So there's stuff about reading accounts, there's stuff about how to do a survey well, there's going to be stuff about how to use the law, but it's all part and parcel of protecting jobs, and that's really the heart of this campaign. And the heart of that at the moment, because of the way that employers are choosing to target their cuts, that's about protecting staff on casualised contracts. And just to flag in one other thing that I can't sit on because it's really annoying me, is we don't have the data for employers. They are refusing at the moment to give us the data to allow us actually to find out the volume of the potential cuts. And because we don't have a very high density amongst casualised staff in our membership, it's very hard for us to find out. So one of the things we absolutely need to do is, one, talk to potential members about whether their jobs are under threat, but also obviously trying to get those people into membership. We need to build the density of members who are on casualised contracts within the union so that we have a stronger voice. So we know that the threats are real. We know they're happening. We need to quantify that. We need to be able to quantify that and to say to employers, if you cut these jobs, this will be the impact. This will be the impact on the students. This will be the impact on the student experience. This will be the impact on your ability to allow other staff to carry out research. This will be the impact on the next generation of researchers. This will be the impact on your ability to look at your curriculum and green it. This will be the impact on your ability to look at your curriculum and decolonise it. All the things you say you want to do, you are undermining. All those 2-tick schemes you're in, all those Athena Swan schemes you're in, all those institutions that have signed up to the Research Concordat, you are undermining it by doing what you're doing. And we need to be shouting about that very loud. And that's what we're trying to do, sort of on a big scale, with the campaign, but we're trying to give branches the tools to do that locally, because we need a local voice, because we won't get to every MP. We can try and lobby the government, but you can understand that's got limitations with the government we've got. Local politicians are far more sensitive to what is happening within their colleges, their adult ed services, and their universities in their constituency. So that's what we're trying to do. And I'll hand over to Vicky to see if she can pick up on some of the last questions as well.
Thanks, Jane. There was a couple that were remaining, and I think that you've actually addressed them pretty well in terms of what the Fund the Future campaign is about and how that connects to campaigning at every level of the union. And I think what's important is that we don't think of it as a separate thing, that we think of campaigns at the grassroots and up as completely part and parcel of the same thing, of being part of a union. There was a question in the chat earlier about the action at Goldsmiths that led to being in dispute now. What I need to do, and this is an answer which is infuriating, because it's about the restrictions that are placed on us by the anti-union, and I think we have to be accurate about how we call them, anti-union laws that we have here in the UK. There are massive limitations on the union around any sort of endorsement of unofficial action, but clearly the action on the ground at Goldsmiths shows both the extent of the crisis and the extent of anger among those who are exploited and those colleagues of those who are exploited. And it shows us how restrictive trade union law is in the UK, that it had to be unofficial action that was taken in that circumstance. So UCU has put out a lot of guidance to branches, and that will obviously tell you what the restrictions of the law are. And that's by necessity that's had to go out, because the whole union will be exposed, accounts could be sequestered and so on and so forth, were we to be seen to be, organising unofficial action and so on and so forth. But we should never ignore when that kind of action takes place, because it shows the strength of feeling, and it also shows the strength of organising on the ground. And it's brilliant now that Goldsmiths has moved into a space of organising a formal dispute. And I think we have to recognise the commitment of all the activists there and all across all the grassroots in trying to push all of these issues into the light to see what is happening in the sector. And there's a question that came in the pre-submitted ones that relates a little bit to this, around how can we protect individual members, for example, if they refuse to do the work left by fixed-term colleagues. Again, UCU has put out advice on refusing to undertake work as part of the 10 steps. But what we can do to support that is to request and use stress risk assessment. So if you're being asked to take on additional work, use the tools that are at your disposal to impress upon the management what there is in terms of pressure on workload. Because let's not forget, we're already in an intensified workload situation. And if they really believe that by getting rid of a number of staff and just saying everyone else can pick up the work, something will have to give. It's not possible. There are only so many hours per day that people can work without becoming very seriously unwell. Another question in here was around the possibility of national strike action, ideally in time to disrupt the beginning of the school year over mass redundancies of fixed-term staff. Again, there's a very frustrating answer to this, which is the practicalities of setting up and balloting for a national dispute, including making sure that we get over that 50% turnout threshold, is something that's very difficult to do, particularly by the start of term. It's going to come down to the HE and FE sector committees about how they wish to pursue this. We do know there's a sector conference due to happen in HE around coronavirus. I believe that's coming in the early autumn. I think details will come out soon about that. So that will set policy for the sector. But what we are doing in the meantime is making sure that branches who are considering industrial action as part of their campaign against job cuts are supported. And I would just add to that we need to be making sure that branches are talking to each other, that, you know, we're using regional and national networks to talk to each other and support each other and to coordinate in that way where we're helping each other not to have to keep reinventing the wheel. And that power of solidarity across the sector and across the movement and reaching out to other organisations. I mentioned trades councils earlier and local TUC things as well. I'm going to stop talking because Christina needs to come in and tell you a little bit more about the future events that we've got, and then I'm going to try and very quickly summarise at the end. So thank you. And if we've missed any questions, we'll try and find ways to answer them afterwards.
Thank you. Christina? You need to unmute, Christina.
For me? Yeah, okay. Can you hear me? Yeah. So I'm Christina. I'm from London Met, which is another post-92, so in a very similar situation to the one described by Kieran. And we are putting forward now a local claim. It's quite a detailed claim, actually. We put in our last JCNC for the casualised staff in our institution. And that's really, we've been thinking a lot about the campaign that we had about 3 years ago. We've been through massive crises, but the campaign we had about 3 years ago, which was called the CAS campaign, where we did, actually I've been listening to what everyone's saying and writing down some of the points you've been making, and all this stuff about bringing politicians in and, you know, all the connection with different elements of the society around the university and different unions, bringing other unions in, uniting the students. That's something we did in that campaign, so I think we're going to look at that in the future as well. I've been looking through some of the things that people have been saying, and there are some things that obviously a lot of people have already said stuff about using the equalities impact assessments, which is really, really important. And I think using in conjunction with that the less favourable treatment regulations, because that's where there is really power to fight the employers as well as the health and safety. I would like to respond to Marian's message where she says she has a collective grievance going on at Bournemouth. And I think, again, I'm going to go through the 10 steps in just a second. But I think, to Marian, it would be great if you could let us know a bit more about your collective grievance that you're doing. Because, for example, at my university, we've been told we can't have a collective grievance. So I think maybe we need more knowledge of what different people are doing in different branches to move on and go forward. I know all the things that people have said about, like, more visibility on the ground, getting involved with local politicians, having toolkits and all of that. That's really great. And also working on a regional level and a national level, and creating a labour movement around this, in which we, I think, join with all of the casualised workers in different unions and bring it all together as one coordinated fight is very important. On that note, I would say that I have worked quite close. I've worked very close. I'm one of the organising group for the Corona contracts, and I've also tried to coordinate with other campaigns going on around the country. And that's in my role as the HEC Casualized rep, because I think it's very important that when I'm putting motions or whatever I'm talking about or saying to the NEC, that I'm reflecting the views of staff across the country. So I would say number one is that future action that you could do is get involved with the anti-casualisation email list, which is one way you communicate, and also get in touch with me about things that you would like me to take forward on your behalf to the NEC or HEC. Because the HEC is, as people have already alluded to, is a very important group that organises, you know, for ballots and all of that kind of action, and discusses a lot of this stuff. So that will be very important. So, I mean, I've put several really they are important motions to HEC, upon which I can see that they've been taken on board, and that quite a lot of the stuff that's come out in the 10 steps and the Fund the Future campaign are things that I'm on the basis of representing other groups of staff have called for, as Amy talked about as well, and we talked about. And this includes stuff like engaging in widespread media campaigns to publicise all of these grassroots anti-casualisation efforts, like King's and Precarious Goldsmiths and the Essex GTAs and Corona Contract. It's very important. I think, as I said earlier, I think the making the link with permanent staff is fundamental, because if we don't have the students on our side and we don't have an intersection with permanent staff, we're not going to really win this fight in the way we should. So I think the other side of that is recruiting members to your branch. obviously I come from a branch where we've been completely squashed actually, and we lost a lot of members through mass redundancies. So we're building up, but I think we can all do that. I think we can all, as the 10 Steps campaign says, we can all talk to one person per week and ask them if they'd like to join and recruit more casualised members. Because remember, the kind of makeup of this union is changing. So in the future, we will be a union of casualised workers, actually, if things continue to go on the way they are. So I think we're certainly going to be much more important, and so we need to, recruit more of our members so that we've got more leverage behind us, but also take pride in that. I think on that note, I would say that it's really important that the ACC and all of the groups that we've talked about are kind of combining together and working together. And I think the idea of having a kind of platform where we could all share our work and all get more in contact is a very good one.
Just to
talk about, I finish now. Yeah, we've got quite a few things going on, future events planned. So we're looking towards organising a conference in August, hopefully, for the anti-casualism campaign, which is another thing that came from one of the motions that I put in as well. But we're also doing things like lobbying for extensions to extend contracts. We're lobbying for funded research extensions. We're providing extensive advice on the furlough schemes. We're really doing quite a lot of press work to highlight the threats faced by staff in casualised contracts, and providing guidance and these webinars. And there are several other webinars that are planned on employment rights and equalities and various other issues that are connected with this whole integrated campaign. And we've also got the 10 Steps campaign, which people have already talked quite a lot about. In relation to the future up and coming webinars, they're very useful. We've got one on online surveys for members, one on a practical guide to equality bargaining, which is obviously an issue that's been raised several times in this session, and on COVID-19 employment law, which is very important, including redundancies, and also finally, and most important, protecting migrant staff in HMFE. So I'd invite, get involved with the 10 Steps and let's all put it into action in all of our branches. And let's
Thanks, Christina. Apologies for any echoes. We think we've lost Vicky. She wants to, let me just, before Vicky comes back on, just do a very quick summary. I'd like to quickly involved. Can you hear me? So thank you to Vicky and to Christina for helping me co-chair this. Thanks to Kyron and Stefan and Edda and Elaine and Anthony and Amy. And to Martin and Karen, who have been behind the scenes making this all work, and to Rebecca and to Seamus, our brilliant interpreters. So thank you to all. I'll hand over to Vicky for a very, very quick summing up, Vicky. And thank you everyone for attending mostly. And we hope to see another one of these soon.
Thanks, Jane, and thanks everyone. I promised I'd do this quickly as we've run slightly over time. I think what I'd like to say is that we are currently in a reckoning. Whether or not they choose to acknowledge the contribution of casualised staff, our employers rely on casualised staff for our institutions to work. They rely on workers, ordinary workers, to provide the education, to do the research that colleges, that prison education units, that community education units and universities provide. We are a vital part of not only the economy, but also the community. And it is on our back that their institutions that pay them such high salaries are built. And we need a fundamental rethink of how education works and how education is funded in the UK. And I think it's something that Amy was talking about earlier, where it's about remembering the strength and the power that we have as workers. We need to be together in this. We have a lot of times where we have internal disagreements about how this union works and so on and so forth. We are stronger together. And it is absolutely imperative that we work in an open and democratic way to support each other across campaigns, across branches, across the UK. And in that, we will find that we have hope, that we build more support, for each other and among our communities, and that we collectively work for a much brighter future for education. So I wanted to leave us with that thought, that there is something we can do, and that actually what our employers are most frightened of is that we recognise the power that we have as workers. So thanks very much, and I hope that if there are still questions, you'll find a way to send them in to us, and we can find another way of getting answers out to you. And please take part in more of these webinars, and please just be in